Master your money, free your future. Welcome to Budget for Life. In this video, I want to talk about how big is the Lego partnership going to be for GameStop. Get down to the nitty gritty. Let's actually try to project a financial value to this. Before I get into it, my name is Jeremy. I'm a financial advisor, but this video is not financial advice. This is just for your education and for your entertainment. And if you appreciate it, would love a like, would love a comment, would love a subscription. If you want to go crazy, you could even join the family, join the channel as a fan or as a friend, get some extra clout, get some discounted merch, even get access to my GameStop spreadsheet. Thank you to all the viewers, the watch time, the subscribers. This channel has made almost $300, and 100% of the earnings of this channel go to GME booked shares, DRS shares of GME. And let's see if we can beat this 292 in October. So there's your official September number. Let's see if we can beat it in October. Okay, so GameStop's retail business, it is a hardware business, consoles, phones, etc. It is a software business, video games, hard copy games, right? But more and more, it is transitioning to a collectibles business. And when we think about projecting the value of this collectibles business, we have to talk about the tailwinds of this business, because this business within GameStop, the retailer, is changing by far the most rapidly. For example, just 4 weeks ago is the first time ever that Lego is available in GameStop stores nationwide. They just began a partnership with Lego. And I want to really model out, what does this mean for GameStop? And then I want to talk about, what does it mean for GameStop when Pokemon begins their partnership with Lego in 2026, which will be sold in GameStop stores. Let's start with the Lego business as it stands, and then we'll tackle Pokemon later. Because, again, as we're projecting the numbers for GameStop, it's important to know this $227 million that they made in the collectibles business in Q2 of 2025, this is before they even had Legos. So even in a worst case scenario, is it reasonable to expect the collectibles business to decline when a new entire line of collectibles is available for sale that wasn't available before? Well, let's see. I think probably not, but let's see. What does this really mean? And I was talking about Lego with ChatGPT. I was also looking at Lego's numbers themselves. So in 2024, they made almost 75 billion, which in USD terms is almost $12 billion of revenue on their Lego sales. Now, how much of that revenue came from the United States, or came from right where GameStop is operating? And also, how much of that revenue goes to the retailer, right? Because this is Lego's revenue. GameStop doesn't make what Lego makes, right? GameStop makes what GameStop makes. And here's what's super encouraging to see on their financials. Okay, when you break down their revenue, that 74 Danish billion, or about 12 US billion dollars, you see that the cost of Lego's manufacturing is about a third of their revenue. And then sales and distribution expenses is about a third of their revenue. So Lego is paying, right, retailers, distributors, almost a third of their revenue as their profit, essentially, for selling the Lego products. And then they have their own kind of overhead, their corporate structure, which is about 10 Danish billion. giving them an operating profit of 18 or 19 Danish billion, net of about 14. But this is the most important figure for what could GameStop make is say, okay, about 1/3 of the Lego revenue is available to distributors, but what portion of their total revenue is US driven? Well, check it out, right? Sales of goods per region. The Americas is almost half of that 73, about 35 Danish billion of the Lego revenue was generated from the Americas. They also highlight in this report that total revenue is growing, right? Up 13, 14, 15% year over year. They also highlight that the Americas are the fastest growing portion of their revenue base, which is huge. They also highlight that they just completed a new manufacturing center in Boston, in America, right? In the first half of 2025, they finished this huge manufacturing plant. So already calculating in some of the American growth, you could say that about half of their revenue is generated from the Americas. Now, how much of that is from the United States versus South America, Canada, Mexico? Obviously, we don't know for sure. I asked ChatGPT, they said maybe 80%, but we don't know. But if 80% of half of their revenue is generated from the Americas, then you would take about 28 billion, or really more like 29 billion of this revenue is from the Americas for Lego. Now, how much of that is going to distribution expenses? Maybe about a third, right? About a third of their revenue is distribution expenses. So if you take that number, divide it by 3, there's about a $10 billion annual revenue opportunity for American distributors of Lego. I'm sure a good portion of that comes from warehouses, right? It's not just end user retailers. It's not just your Walmart, your Target, your Amazon, etc. But if GameStop is in this pie, it's about a $10 billion pie annually that GameStop is putting themselves in position to capitalize on. And again, the competition from a scale perspective is massive when you think about your Walmarts and your Amazons. But if you believe that GameStop has any value as a brand, or that they are building any type of traction as a specialty retailer, there truly is no competition within that niche. There's no Toys R Us anymore, right? Lego, GameStop is essentially becoming the national collector's store, the national toy store, the national gamer store, the national sports memorabilia store. Maybe one day it'll be the national record store, right? All of the enthusiast, all of the entertainment, all of the collector, all of the gamer, those associated retailers, GameStop is the closest thing to a nationalized brand, a nationalized version of that physical retail experience. All the other specialty retailers are like clothes places and hardware stores, right? And the closest thing is Best Buy, and they're not exactly a gamer-centric brand. Regardless, that $10 billion pie, what slice does GameStop eventually get? Is it 5%? If so, then you're looking at about a $50 billion revenue item per year for GameStop, which represents what, about a 6% growth alone in their collectibles revenue? And how does GameStop, what costs does GameStop have for the collectibles? What type of business does Lego like to operate? That's a good question. I'm assuming that if you were to split their basically either GameStop is purchasing Legos from Lego and then they are selling it for the 2/3 Lego margin, or they are licensing the product from Lego and then they're making the licensing margin, the 1/3, right? Probably it's a little bit of both, but I'm assuming mostly licensing. Regardless, no matter what way you slice it, this $50 million per year floor is kind of like, not necessarily floor, but just estimate. I would assume most of that is net profit. And if you wanted to map it out the other way, where no GameStop actually buys the Lego sets and then sells them, then you would have an even higher revenue figure, but then you would also have higher cost of sales associated with that revenue figure. Let me blow this spreadsheet up a little bit for you guys. Sorry about that. I'm sorry. Now, what if GameStop is 10% of the American portion of the Lego market? Well, now you're talking about maybe $100 million in annual revenue. That could be more like a 10% bump in their collectibles business just from the static Lego. Why would GameStop command maybe a 10% share? Again, it could be related to what they are doing as a brand. It could be related to the fact that pro members often can get things cheaper at GameStop than other retailers. It could be that Lego has a preference to distribute through GameStop from a vendor perspective. There could be a lot of reasons why GameStop's market share of the collectibles business and of the entertainment, the toy, the game business, it could be disproportionately in GameStop's favor. Now that 100 million would grow in line with how does Lego grow? And Lego as it stands, they grow what, about 13% a year? Operating profit about 10% a year. This is year over year growth in Lego, but they just finished a manufacturing plant. They're already building another manufacturing plant. So does that mean that they could even grow a little bit quicker? It's certainly possible. All that to say that 50 to 100 million of revenue that hypothetically is now officially on the table for GameStop is going to grow if you believe that Lego is going to grow. And Lego has been growing for many, many, many years. And the likelihood that that somehow immediately halts and reverses is very low. But let's talk about this Pokemon dynamic and what could Pokemon mean for Lego? And in turn, what could that mean for GameStop? And to understand this, you really need to know a little bit of Lego's history, which is that they were heading to the dumps in the late 90s and early 2000s. Literally, they had almost $1 billion in debt. They had losses of, I guess the US equivalent of 1.4 billion is about $224 million. So their losses were similar to the types of losses that GameStop was getting when everyone said that GameStop was doomed, right? When GameStop was the laughing stock of the world, right? The worst, the most meme stock ever. How could you ever turn that around? Those are the types of losses, and that's the type of debt that Lego was going through before their partnership. I mean, they did several things, right? They simplified their business, they cut costs, they got more efficient in their delivery, their fulfillment of orders. But from a growth perspective, where did that narrative shift? Because Lego was the original, we are not able to change with the times. Everyone's moving to games, everyone's going online, everything's getting digital. No one wants to play with Legos anymore, right? Lego was basically the original GameStop, right? GameStop, oh, they haven't evolved with the times. Software is going digital, future consoles, who knows if we'll even need them because everything's getting so tech. No one wants to go in the store anymore. No one cares about legacy retro games. It's all online now. That was exactly where Lego was. And what Lego did to turn themselves around was exactly what GameStop has done to turn itself around in terms of improving margins, cutting SG&A, cutting out revenue lines that weren't profitable for them, and then leveraging into growth through key partnerships. GameStop's key partnerships are already numerous, one of them being PSA, and now another one of them being Lego. And what Lego's key partnership was back then was Star Wars. And I want to try to illustrate what did that partnership with Star Wars do for Lego. And it's hard to know, they don't break down exactly what the Star Wars portion of their revenue is, but they've said it's one of their top selling licensed themes, right? They said at one point they were growing 20% year over year. And if you go down to the valuation of Star Wars as an enterprise, you get an idea for how impactful Lego has been for Star Wars, and in turn, how important Star Wars has been for Lego. But I wanted to highlight, how did Star Wars generally help before I get into the numbers of it. And immediately, they outsold Lego's expectations. And get this, they helped draw in new customers, including older kids and collectors. And collectors. So again, Lego, the original GameStop, and what was the growth engine that changed them from we're just cutting costs to try to get back to profit to we are now making billions and billions and billions of dollars every year? Key partnerships with licensing deals that gave them a collectibles business. Lego went from we sell toys that people don't want to play with anymore, just like GameStop is going from we sell video games that people don't want anymore, to we are a collectibles business. People began buying Star Wars sets to scalp them, to hodl them as an alternative investment, right? And that demand, that was unexpected. Lego didn't see that coming. But check out the brand value for Star Wars, if I can find it. Let's see. Star Wars revenue about 30, show me the 32 billion figure. Okay. Sorry, guys, I could have done this live with you, but I wanted to save you a little bit of time. In 2015, it was estimated that the Star Wars franchise was worth about $42 billion. And the sales in 2018 lifetime of their merchandise and licensing was about 32 billion compared to about 9 billion of box office sales. So the Star Wars merch was worth about 4 times as much as the Star Wars movies. And you see that carry over into the valuation of their franchise as a whole, right? It's almost 4-to-1 merch to movies. And now see the comparison with Pokemon. Pokemon, first of all, on the surface, is twice or maybe 2.5 times as valuable as Star Wars. So again, when we're talking about this Lego partnership, what could it mean for Lego? Just connect the dots with me for a second. That Star Wars, a franchise that is, even after their Lego partnership, is maybe 40% of the value of Pokemon. And yet, their partnership with Lego not only turned Lego around as a company, but it also represents maybe 80% of the value of their franchise, right? The question is how much of this 32 comes from Lego versus other merch, and we're going to dive into that in a second. But Pokemon's licensing, similarly, is a huge portion of their franchise value. The trading card game is maybe 15 billion. Their video games and kind of media is maybe 20 billion. So it's like 20, 20, 80, right? So about, for Star Wars, it was about 4-to-1 licensing to core products. For Pokemon, it's about 2-to-1, right? You have about probably 40 billion. I'm assuming this trading card game figures in 2021. So this is an old number, and no doubt it is much more than that now. You've seen it boom over the recent quarters and years. So let's just say conservatively, they've climbed to about 20, right? It's about 2-to-1 merchandise to core products, but their merch on a dollar figure sells almost 3 times what the Star Wars merch sells. Are you tracking with me so far? Now, here's the thing. What portion of Star Wars merch, that 32 billion that have made from their merch, what portion of that do you think comes from Lego? Well, estimates suggest that Lego Star Wars has generated 15 billion in lifetime sales as of the mid 2020s. 15 billion compared to their total merchandise sales, often cited at 30 to 40 billion. Do you understand what this means? Star Wars might account for 50%. Sorry, Lego might account for 50% of Star Wars merchandise sales. How much, and yet, Star Wars merchandise sales is half or maybe even closer to a third of Pokemon's merchandise sales. Now, what about Pokemon's licensing? How much of that comes from Lego? Guess what? 0. Because Pokemon had never licensed with Lego before. Pokemon, the brand that is worth 2 or 3 times as much as Star Wars. The brand whose merchandise is already selling twice as much as Star Wars. on a dollar figure basis, has not made a single dollar from Lego. I'm sorry for confusing you so much in this video. Has not made a single dollar from Lego, whereas Lego represents half of Star Wars merchandise sales. So what does Pokemon mean for Lego? Well, on the low end, you could say that they're going to sell the same amount as Star Wars Legos is how much they're going to sell in Pokemon Legos. I would say that is a ultra conservative figure, particularly when you think about this franchise is worth 3 times as much. It is literally 3 times as popular. And that's without Lego. So could Lego Pokemon sell 3 times as much? Certainly in the cards. Let's think about it another way. So if they sold 3 times as much, that would make them a $45 billion in lifetime revenue. Well, let's just call it 20-year revenue. Like, let's just say that Star Wars has sold about 15 billion over about 20 years. Let's say most of the revenue has happened from 2005 to 2025. Right? So in 20 years, Pokemon, worst case, is going to sell probably 20 billion. In a different case, if they are proportional, if the Lego popularity is proportional, you'd say maybe they would make 45 billion over the next 20 years. Let's think about it in light of, though, the booming collectibles market that we are seeing globally, not just in Lego, but across all types of collectibles. And then let's think about the booming franchise value, the booming collectibles market specifically within Pokemon. Pokemon is the franchise that has been popping off in the TCG market, right? Those are the trading cards, the PSA graded cards that are blowing up the most often in value. Whoo! Not to mention, this will be the first ever sets of Pokemon. Pokemon will, for many years to come, literally they will sell every single set they make. They will sell out because of the collector value, particularly of these early sets. It's just crazy to think about. One last way to think about how much could they sell. Star Wars, as a franchise, half of their merch comes from Lego. Pokemon doesn't sell any Lego. So if Lego becomes half of Pokemon's merch, well, what does that mean for lifetime? 80 billion. 80 billion, right? Which we could take a little bit off of this because Pokemon's merch really started an extra 10 years. So 80 billion over 30 years. If Lego becomes half of Pokemon's merch business, then you would have 80 over 30 years, which is about 2.6 billion a year in Pokemon Lego revenue. We're about to bring it down to what does it mean to GameStop. That's if Lego represents proportionally half of Pokemon's merch, just like it represents half of Star Wars merch. The other way that we had just thought about it. Oh, where was I? 15. Pokemon is 3 times as valuable as a franchise as Star Wars. So 45 billion, right? 3 times as much over the next 20 years is 2.25 billion. So the moderate estimate is 2.25 billion of Pokemon sales in the next 20 years. The worst you could really imagine is about 20 billion. And that would represent a huge cooling off of the collectibles hype, which to expect a cool off for the most popular brand in the world, the most popular franchise in the world, the most valuable franchise in the world, to expect a cool off for a product that has not even been available for sale yet is crazy. Expect a cool off in Lego Star Wars? Sure. But a cool off in Pokemon Lego is crazy. A cool off in Pokemon trading cards? Maybe. Maybe. But a cool off in Pokemon Lego? When these are the first sets that will ever be made is crazy. It's crazy to imagine that. And so really the worst case you could imagine is 20 billion over the next 20 years. And then do you think that's a linear slope, a straight line? No, again, they're gonna sell everything they make in 2026 on the same day, no doubt. I mean, they're gonna be flying off the shelves. In year 18 and 19 and 20, are those slopes beginning to fade? Is the demand beginning to slow down? Sure. That's all the better for Pokemon, all the better for Lego, all the better for GameStop, because it means some portion of this 20 to 45 to 80 billion in revenue that's coming is going to be front loaded. You're going to see it hit soon and not just be a linear slope. You're going to see it be like a logarithmic, like exponential and then flattening out over time slope. Now, what month in 2026 does this land? I don't know, right? We don't know. We just know it's 2026. Are they at volume production right away? Probably not, right? So 2027 might be the first year that you really get to see Lego Pokemon impact GameStop's collectibles line. But you are looking at, for Lego as a whole, probably at least for a couple years, 2 billion a year, if not more. And now you're looking at, well, what portion of Lego is in the Americas, right? About half. So if it's 2 billion a year in the Americas, right? And if the the United States portion of that billion, or if you go with that 2.5, about half of that is in America, in the Americas. If about 80% of that is in the United States, that's about 1 billion of basically net profits available for distributors. Let me slow down a second. We're talking about, show me their numbers again. A company that makes 75 billion. I mean, we're talking about, there's honestly, this is a whole other way to model it. This is a whole other way to model what I'm talking about. So we just went through the franchise value way. The other way is to look at at Lego's numbers way, and to say on a just gross estimation perspective, what does Pokemon mean for a company that makes, a 12 billion a year in revenue? We're basically saying that it represents at least a $2.5 billion immediate growth, which would be about a 21% growth rate as a company. That sounds conservative to me. Again, could you imagine it being more than that? Sure, but it's already growing at 13% even without Pokemon. Again, the most valuable franchise in the world. I think 2.5 is very conservative total revenue. Half of that is in America, the Americas. 80% of that is in the United States. Basically, a third of that is available for distributors, and then what market does GameStop get of that? Let's say they end up at that 10% number. That's another basically $33 million a year in revenue. So we talked about they might be at a 50 or $100 million of annual revenue from Lego. Basically, Pokemon off the jump bumps that by another 25%, essentially that same proportional percentage growth. And that puts you at 125, and that's being quite conservative. Like, it really could easily be that Pokemon represents a 50% bump in what GameStop can make from Lego. Because there's no telling what happens with the collector value of these Pokemon Legos. There's no telling. Regardless, though, that 125 to $150 million per year that essentially they get starting in 2026, then it's how do you value that portion of GameStop's collectibles business? It's also how much faster does Lego grow? It's also how much more of a market share does GameStop gain? So there's lots of long tail projections that you're envisioning here. But the more of a share that GameStop gets, which that's the way things are trending, the more popular that Lego gets, which that's the way things are trending, the more popular that Pokemon gets, which that's the way that things are trending, you begin to model a business line that maybe it starts at 100 or 125 million a year, but the growth rate that you would associate with it could be 30 or 40, 50% a year. And then how do you value on a PE basis that 120, $150 million revenue line that, again, if we're talking license fees, most of that's net profit, right? The cost of sales in that case would be minimal, but then you still have to back out a little bit of SG&A. Let's just call it around $100 million that GameStop clears from this Lego plus Pokemon starting 2027 and beyond. Well, if this is booming, then all of a sudden that $100 million kind of net profit, net income, operating income that's possible, why wouldn't you give it a 40 PE? Right? If it's boom, why don't you give it a 60 PE if it's booming? Right? And all of a sudden this is a 4 or a 5 or a $6 billion business, just the Lego line. Within just the collectibles line within GameStop, the retailer. So when you're talking about GameStop at $27.38 a share, you net out the cash, you get a $3 billion market cap that they're being given right now. It's like their market cap could be worth twice this amount without factoring in any of their current collectibles business. 0% of this Lego partnership and this Pokemon licensing partnership with Lego has been reflected in their numbers yet because they haven't been available for sale yet. And you're saying that that line alone could double GameStop's valuation, not even to speak of the partnership with PSA, not even to speak of the software and hardware businesses that I've been talking about. Lego has the opportunity to be a huge impact on GameStop's business, particularly when they are valued at such a modest market cap. Absolutely, this could have a huge, huge impact. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Do you think I'm being too bullish? Think I'm being too bearish? How would you model out the partnership with Lego? What could it mean for GameStop on a revenue basis? What could it mean for Lego on a revenue basis? What's going to mean for Pokemon? Other ways you could envision modeling this out. Would love to hear it. Thank you guys so much. I will see you in the next one. Later.